Alright, guys, so February is coming, and that is a very important date. It's the month where Trump could start his global trade war. A 25% tariff is coming for both Mexico and Canada, and this could be the first target. Now, a lot of people think that Trump is joking, but we have to take his threat seriously because he is the president of the United States. It's not a game show anymore. Trump has confirmed that tariffs are the way to go.
It's time for the United States to return to the system that made us richer and more powerful than ever before. Do you know the United States in 1870 to 1913, all tariffs, and that was the richest period in the history of the United States, relatively speaking. In other words, relatively. As I said in my speech last week, instead of taxing our citizens to enrich foreign nations, we should be tariffing and taxing foreign nations to enrich our citizens. Does that make sense, right?
Lower taxes for the US and the shortfall will be made up with tariffs. So, no, I don't think he's kidding here. Just like how the dollar was weaponized, Trump is going to use the US consumer market as a financial bazooka to extract money from the world. And it's going to backfire because tariffs are paid by the consumer themselves, but it doesn't matter. It's full steam ahead for the trade war. Scott Bessent has just been confirmed. Now, this is Yellen's replacement, and he is one of the architects of the tariff war, and he wants to push US tariffs on the world from 0 to 20% in increments of 2.5%. In fact, Trump wants this jump to be even faster. Remember, this is a universal tariff, so not just China will be clobbered, BRICS, the G7, Asia, and Latin America, everyone will get punished. Exporting to the US is going to get harder. Now, what does this mean for the world? Expect GDP growth to fall, especially countries that trade a ton with the US. Secondly, a global currency crisis is approaching fast. Almost immediately, the US dollar index flew up. Since global trade is still done in the USD, imports for the whole world will get more expensive. Whether you're in Japan, Singapore, Europe, or the UK, local inflation will rise. Your power bills, your grocery bill, and shipment from Amazon will cost more. And if you want something to blame, you gotta blame the coming US tariffs. And as you can guess, it's yet another reason why the world needs to de-dollarize. We have to escape this financial prison. But let's focus on Canada because they are about to be the frontline victims of US punishments, and they are in panic mode. The former finance minister who wants to be PM is calling for a coalition against the US for all targets of Trump's trade war to band together like a B-rate version of the Avengers. And this will include Mexico, Denmark, Canada, Panama, and the EU. Now, it's hilarious and sad at the same time to see how things have devolved. Even US allies are losing their nerve. Now, Trump has been mocking Canada almost daily, and he wants Greenland plus the Panama Canal. So countries around the world, they are spooked. So what does Canada have in store for the US? Because they aren't exactly helpless. The first surprise is tariffs on $105 billion on US products coming into the country. This is the first blow to the US economy and is targeting exporters. So the auto industry, consumer goods, chemicals, and machinery are all fair game now. If your goods are coming from up north, be prepared to pay more. Now, I want to stress that a trade war is a scenario where no one wins. Both economies will suffer, inflation will rise, and growth will slump. And whether you're in the US or Canada, living standards are going to drop. Now, the Tax Foundation calculated the impacts this will have on both economies. If the US imposes a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, the damage would be significant. GDP will fall by 40 basis points. Full-time jobs will contract by 340,000, and that's on the US side. For Canada, GDP will drop by 30 basis points and 280,000 jobs would be lost. It's interesting to see that of all the trade war participants, China would be the least affected. Exports there aren't solely dependent on the US, but for Canada and Mexico, it's a much different story. However, it could get potentially worse for the US. Trump's plan is truly bipolar or tripolar. He wants everything for US oil companies to prosper, but he also wants oil prices to come down. And here's what we mean. Trump can't fill the strategic reserve, sanction Iranian oil, put a 25% tariff on Canada, ramp up the demand for ICE cars, and lower the cost of living for Americans all at the same time. And ultimately, he will have to choose. But what he said in Davos betrayed his biggest need for the US economy. Remember, he told global central banks around the world to drop interest rates to boost growth, which means the US economy fundamentally can't withstand higher rates for longer. Canada has something vital that the US needs, especially when Trump wants to boost economic growth, and that something is cheap and abundant energy. And this is why we need to talk about Canada's nuclear option of export restrictions of energy to the US, because that card is most definitely on the table. And let's understand how exposed the US economy is to cheap Canadian oil. Now, the exposure isn't as bad as the EU to Russian gas, but still very significant. The US imports 4.4 million barrels of crude a day from Canada, the highest since June 2010. And these are crude coming into US refineries and processed into gasoline and diesel. So it's being used directly to power the US economy. In fact, the dependency is huge. Canadian supply accounts for 52% of total US imports, three times more than oil from the OPEC countries. If this supply vanishes or becomes pricier, US inflation would most definitely rise. And this puts Trump in a pickle. Can he afford for inflation to soar? There has to be some incentives for producers to uproot and move their factories all the way to the US. Because all we are hearing today, seriously, are punishments and tariffs.
In the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. And we want them to come back. And we don't want to give them billions of dollars like this ridiculous program that Biden has. Give everybody billions of dollars. They already have billions of dollars. They've got nothing but money, Joe. They didn't need money. They needed an incentive. And the incentive is going to be they're not going to want to pay a 25, 50, or even 100% tax. They're going to build their factory with their own money. We don't have to give them money. They're going to come in because it's good for them to come in. They're giving them money. They don't even know what they're going to do with it. I had people tell me, we have no idea. We didn't need money. The only way you'll get out of this is to build your plant. If you want to stop paying the taxes or the tariffs, you have to build your plant right here in America. That's what's going to happen at record levels.
So Trump's version of an incentive to companies is not paying a tariff. Your reward is the US not punishing you. You won't be getting any carrots, you will just dodge tariffs. And if you're a manufacturer in Taiwan, Europe, or the Middle East, that sounds like a really raw deal. If you ship production to the US, you will be dealing with a nightmare. With Trump's tariffs, material costs are going to soar. They can't afford to lose cheap energy from Canada, not at this point. Now, in 2023, the US enjoyed a discount of $18 when importing Canadian oil. That's a tremendous amount of savings, and if that disappears, it makes the argument harder to manufacture in the US. The true driver of manufacturing, especially when competing with China, is cheap energy. But there's also another problem we must talk about. The US will not be the biggest consumer market in the world forever. By 2030, the biggest markets will be in Asia. Over a billion consumers from China alone, nearly 800 million from India, and 160 million from Indonesia. Now, these are growing markets, but notice one commonality between them. They are all part of BRICS, and this makes manufacturing in the US less attractive. And let's say you're a German company and you move production to the US. Sure, you can access 350 million American customers, and sure, they might pay more. But here's the issue. Because your products made in the US are so expensive, you can't export them out to the rest of the world. It just doesn't make economic sense. And that's why many countries choose China as their economic base. And that's why in this economic bargain, Canada's hand isn't exactly bad. Sure, they have an extreme reliance on the US, but Trump's agenda makes him very reliant on Canadian energy as well. Now, this dependence goes beyond oil. Since 1909, Canada has been sending electricity to the US as well. Every province is electrically interconnected with at least one US state. And this sets up a very interesting energy showdown. Not only does the US get cheap oil Access to cheap power also comes from up north, and this is why it's quite important. This map shows us the electricity trade between Canada and the US, and by far Canada is the biggest exporter. They sold over $3 billion worth of power into the US, while the US only exported $1 billion worth of power back. And because Canada is energy rich, they can generate power cheaper than the US. Selling and buying power is important. If US power plants get shut down or a natural disaster hits, they will need electricity in a hurry. If Trump encounters a cold snap, a heat wave, or flood, he'll need Canada to send electricity in a pinch. There's no time to generate excess power. Getting power from Canada on demand is not just a cost issue, it's about national security for the US. So the stakes are actually very high. It's not just the energy sector that's at risk. The US also gets a lot of intermediate imports up north, and these are the building blocks for manufacturing. Canadian steelmakers are already refusing to supply their US customers because of the tariffs, and who can blame them? If Trump's 25% tax gets imposed, will their buyers stay around or cancel their order? Will steelmakers be forced to absorb for their buyers? When it comes to products like steel, a 25% tariff is enough to wipe out any profit margin. This is the problem facing all targets of Trump's trade war. Now, once again, the tariffs will backfire. Now, sure, some jobs might come back, some industries will reshore, but companies manufacturing in the US will have to accept one reality here. Whatever you make in a country will be stuck in the US. Competing with exporters like China will be impossible. And let's go back to the steel example. In 2023, the US economy imported the most steel products from Canada and Mexico. If you slap a 25% tariff on everything, imported steel would cost more. And where else would you source it from? From Brazil? From South Korea? Sure, those are alternatives, but the cost of shipping would be much higher than just getting it from your neighbors. You can see the big dilemma Trump is facing here. He assumes he can tariff the world and face no consequences, and it's not possible anymore. But here's the scary thing, we best believe Trump would try to make it happen. He will reshore manufacturing back to the US at any cost. The collateral damage will be Canada, Mexico, and economies around the world. But let me know what you think. Will Trump back down or raise the stakes? And will Canada cut off all energy supply to the US? Do they dare to do that? Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.